Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to commend my colleague from Texas for stating the case for isolationism and appeasement as eloquently as he has. It's appropriate...
Would the gentleman yield on that?
When I'm finished.
Okay.
It is appropriate when we are discussing a major international issue that the various positions be laid out clearly so we can make an intelligent decision. In this century, we have had numbers of instances when in this body the voices of isolationism presented their case. And whenever they prevailed, and they prevailed from time to time, the cost in blood and treasure later on was infinitely greater than it would have been had the perpetrators of violence, human rights abuse, whether they were called Hitler or Saddam Hussein or the Indonesian militia or the thugs of Milosevic, had they been stopped early on, the cost would have been, in both blood and treasure, infinitely less. Here now we have the case of East Timor. My friend from Texas, instead of placing the burden of blame on the thugs who have persecuted a small Catholic minority in a large Muslim nation, the largest Muslim nation on the face of this planet, blames the United States for contributing 200 forces in providing logistical and technical assistance to an international peacekeeping armada. I could not disagree with him more strongly. One of the great victories that I am sure we all cherished was the collapse of the Soviet Empire. The Soviet Empire and the threat it represented to civilized, democratic, peace-loving nations across the globe was clearly one of the greatest threats of the 20th century. And it was the determination of the United States and our allies in facing up to the mighty Soviet Union that resulted in the collapse of the Soviet Empire, in the fact that large numbers of countries from Poland to the Czech Republic are now democratic and free, many of them members of NATO, 3 of them now members of NATO. Now, if we did not yield to the threats of the gigantic Soviet Union, a powerful nuclear nation with vast conventional forces, it would be intriguing to know why we should now yield to the militia thugs in East Timor who are denying the Catholic population of that little island to live on the rules and authorities and leadership of their own choosing. I have difficulty following the logic. If the Soviet Union could be resisted by democratic and peace-loving nations, it is hard to see why Milosevic should not be resisted in Kosovo, and while the thugs of the militia in East Timor should not be resisted by democratic forces. Let me also point out to my friend, as he well knows, that it is our ally Australia which is carrying the bulk of the load in East Timor. That is as it should be. Australia is the most powerful military unit in the whole region. And our friends in Australia willingly and proudly accepted their international responsibility. For the United States to bail out on this effort would undermine our long-term policy conducted by Democratic and Republican presidents, supported by democratically controlled and Republican-controlled Congresses, of speaking out for and taking a stand on the matter of collective security.
Would the gentleman yield?
In 1 minute. I think it is important to realize that there is a common thread running through our opposition to the Japanese warlords in the Second World War, to Mussolini and Hitler, to the long regime of Joseph Stalin, and to other dictators ranging from Saddam Hussein through Milosevic to the militia, the thugs in East Timor. To argue at the end of the 20th century that we should revert to isolationism is really a sorry spectacle. What it reveals is that nothing has been learned from the bloody experiences of this entire century, which so clearly demonstrate that neither appeasement nor isolationism are proper policies for the United States. I'm happy to yield to my colleague.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and the gentleman makes a good case for the humanitarian needs of the people. My point is that sometimes our efforts don't do what they want. For instance, you talk about the thugs that are in Indonesia, those who are violating the rights of the East Timorese. We have to realize that they have been our allies, and we help set up the situation, so our interventions don't always do what they want. Also, you talk about the Soviets. Periodically, we supported the Soviets.
Reclaiming my time, if I may. If I may remind my colleague of history, it was President Ford, and under President Ford's tenure, allow me to finish, under President Ford's tenure, that we acquiesced in the occupation of East Timor by the Indonesian military.
Would the gentleman yield on that point?
I will be happy to yield.
Okay, and I think he's absolutely correct. But I happen to see these things in a very nonpartisan manner, so to turn this into a Republican versus Democrat issue, I think is an error. I would like to suggest that the careless use of the word isolationism doesn't apply to me, because I am not a protectionist. I believe in openness. I want people and capital and goods and services to go back and forth. When you trade with people, you're less likely to fight with them. So this is the proposal and the program I am suggesting is a constitutional program. I believe it is the best for the people. It has nothing to do with isolating ourselves from the rest of the world. It's to isolate ourselves from doing dumb things that get us involved in things like Korea and Vietnam, where we don't even know why we're there and we end up losing. That's what I'm opposed to.
Reclaiming my time, I must say to my colleague from Texas that we have heard voices in the last few days on the part of one presidential candidate calling our participation in the Second World War against Hitler a mistake. Now, this is a free country. People can choose to accept any position that they are inclined to do so. Let me state for myself that I think our participation in the Second World War was one of the most glorious aspects of the whole of American history. Our standing up, not at the moment, our standing up to the regime of Stalin and other communist dictators in the second half of this century is among the most glorious aspects of our history. The work of President Bush in pulling together a coalition in facing up to Saddam Hussein was an important and glorious chapter in our history. And what we are seeing unfolding in East Timor now represents just another chapter in the determination of the American people and the American government to stand up to the horrendous dictatorships that still are present in many parts of this globe. And I hope that as we enter the 21st century, this bipartisan policy of rejecting isolationism will continue.
Will the gentleman yield for one moment?
Not at this moment. I yield to my friend from Nebraska.
Time.
May I ask, I reserve the balance of my time. May I ask how much time both sides have?
The gentleman from California has 4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from New York has 11 minutes remaining.
Now, Mr. Speaker, please yield an additional minute to Dr. Paul.
I thank the chairman very much.
Recognized.
I would like to just respond to trying to tie in World War II. I think that's not quite fair. You have to admit, we're not talking about that. Besides, I'm talking as much about procedure as I am talking about the policy itself. World War II, there was a serious problem around the world. It was brought to this Congress. We voted on a war resolution. We went to war. The country was unified, and we won. That's what I endorse, that policy. What I don't endorse is us getting involved the back doorway, getting involved carelessly and casually, not realizing what we're doing. I come to the floor only to try to warn my colleagues on what they're voting on today. It's not just a simple humanitarian resolution. So it is the process. If you bring a war resolution to the floor and say, look, we need to go to war to defend the East Timorese, vote it up and down and decide and go over there and settle it in about 3 months or 2 months. But don't do what we're doing now to endorse internationalism, which fails, interventionism that fails. I think we have a better procedure, and it's written in the Constitution.
Gentleman's time has expired.